Okay, what a remarkable privilege to sit with all of you. I just want to thank the host, wonderful host, for making this possible, and to everybody else who's involved in arranging these shiurim. I don't know what this is, but I think it's wonderful. Anytime that people are getting together to learn, I'm sure it's a good thing, and it's a privilege to be involved. And it's a wonderful thing to learn all the time, but it's even deeper to be able to sit together and learn right before a yontiv. When we know that the Sfarim HaKadoshim tell us, the holy works tell us that to the degree that a person prepares themselves for an upcoming special time, that's exactly the degree to which they're going to benefit from that experience. And actually, the great Hasidic masters found that hinted to in the Megillah itself, where the pasuk tells us about Achashverosh, the wicked king, who was advised by Haman to kill Vashti. Right? That was Haman's suggestion after Vashti rebels against Achashverosh's wishes. And the pasuk says, "Vayas hamelech kedvar memuchan." The king Achashverosh did in accordance with the advice of Memuchan. So Memuchan, our sages teach us, is actually Haman, just a different word. But we know that any time the word melech is in the Megillah, where it isn't Hamelech Achashverosh, right, and it's followed up by Achashverosh, we know that it's in a very deep and hidden way to reference to Hashem. So they say the pasuk is actually telling us, Vayas hamelech HaKadosh Baruch Hu does for a person kedvar memuchan, in accordance with memuchan. And memuchan is seen as having the root of the word hachana, to prepare. So Vayas hamelech kedvar memuchan. The king Hashem will grant us whatever experience we hope to have in the upcoming Chag, in accordance with memuchan, in accordance with our preparation for it. So that's a remarkable thing to sit and learn now. Erev Purim, essentially Erev Purim, but it's the week of. It's already since the beginning of Adar is the energy of Purim, and not only that, but to sit and to learn together on an Erev Purim in 2025, with the whole world, either falling apart or coming together. Probably it's both at the same time, hopefully, but it appears to be the former. And the fact, like I always get this feeling whenever Jews get together to learn, what we say in davening, after everything that we've been through, we haven't forgotten you. Like Rav Nosson and Breslev, we'll be learning a little bit from that Beis Medrash together tonight. Rav Nosson writes again and again in his collection of prayers that's called Likutei Tfilos, a very phenomenal, remarkable collection of prayers. Rav Nosson says, Banu at sof kol hadoros. He says we've arrived at the end of all generations. He said this 300 years ago. He says va'idenu imach, and like we're still with you. A phenomenal thing. And so that just gives us chizuk. All of us are challenged by the various challenges that we experience, but just to give ourselves strength to realize, like we're still here talking about Purim. Like we're still here trying not just to talk about the outside of Purim and sort of the food and the costumes and the shalach manas and all that is all very beautiful, and in a certain way it's inside, even though it's outside, but it's the outside of an inside thing, so it's already inside. But we're getting together to really connect to the heart and soul of it, and that's a remarkable thing, and I don't think that we should take it for granted, and I don't take it for granted. So thank you all for being here, and let's learn together. So the title of the shiur, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, was
Jokes on You.
Jokes on You. That's right. Somebody pointed out, I said, I like that title. Jokes on You. And I was just thinking, I don't want to give it away, but I don't think, we'll see who listens to the shiur. But I was just listening to the radio this morning, and apparently Manchester United is going to be building a new stadium. And I was driving, and one of the guys who was discussing it mentioned Man United. I don't know the first thing about football. A little bit about American football, which they don't play with their feet. But I don't know anything about football at all. So, but he just, instead of saying Manchester United, he said Man United. And I thought that would be a good title for a Shavuos shiur. Man United, right? One man united. So we'll see. But anyway, jokes on you. Jokes on you. How to battle Amalek. So I want to begin this little thought journey together with a pasuk from Shlomo Melech. I believe it's in Mishlei, but I don't want to say for sure because I'm always unsure whether it's in Mishlei or Koheles, and I should have looked it up, but it's been a very long day and a very long week. a long month, and Baruch Hashem, it's busy. And the pasuk says, Leitz take upesi yarim, which means that a clown, like a leitzan, a clown, take, needs to be, not physically, but hit in some way and shaken up. So a person needs to be disciplined, right? It was disrupting. Leitz take upesi yarim, and the fool will be elevated, or made wise, will be elevated. Leitz take upesi yarim. And the Medrash comments on these two subjects of this verse, one of which is a clown, a leitz. A clown is maybe not the best word. What's a leitz? Is a scoffer, like a cynic, right? A jokester, but like in a detrimental, like a person who's making light of things. A leitz, a cynic. On the one hand, and the pesi, the person he's very simple, but he's just not so wise. On the other hand, and Chazal comment, they say leitz is a reference to Amalek, and the Pesi is a reference to Yisro. That's what it says. And they apply that pasuk to this, that Yisro approaches Vayishma Yisro, and Chazal comment, or sages teach, what did he hear? That Yisro drew forth from being the chief idolater of all the idols in the world, that he worshipped each and every one of them. What did he hear that caused him to draw forth to the Jewish nation? He heard Kriyas Yamsov, Umilchemes Amalek. Right, he heard the splitting of the sea, which other midrashim tell us not only did he hear, the whole world heard it, because the water split all over the world, and everybody was aware that a tremendous miracle had taken place for God's chosen nation. And then he heard about Amalek. And Amalek is juxtaposed with Yisro. Yisro is a Pesi. He was seeking the truth. He looked down a lot of dead ends, and he got involved with a lot of different kinds of things. But he was authentic, he was genuine. He was a genuine spiritual seeker. And the pasuk says, a spiritual seeker, Yarim. He'll make it in the end. But Amalek is the Leitz. Amalek makes light of things. And that is not something that's so easy to deal with, especially when you deal with teenagers. I'm privileged enough to spend quite a lot of time a week with teenagers. And I spent quite a lot of time being a teenager, not so long ago either. So I know a little bit about that. It's getting steadily further from that, and I keep on making that joke. So I have to wake up to the realization that I'm not quite 23 anymore. But when you deal with different kinds of teenagers, this is an important framework, because there's a huge difference between a person who has energy and life and is looking and is seeking, and they might be into all the wrong things, but there's vibrancy, like they're looking for something. And then somebody who's just completely emotionally shut down and not interested in anything. That's much more difficult. I'd rather a person who's running to all the religions in the world, because they can redirect it, you can channel it, he's seeking, you can help him find the destination that he might be looking for. But someone who has no energy at all is very, very difficult. That's the aspect, again, our teenagers are not Amalek, but in a certain sense, that's an Amalekian spirit that takes hold of our teenagers and our adults, and maybe even you and me from time to time. And the pasuk bears this out. The verse tells us that Amalek makes his first entrance upon the stage of Jewish history when Klal Yisrael are making their way from Mitzrayim, like we just mentioned, to Har Sinai. This is perhaps the most serious and resolute journey that any group of people has ever taken, ever, in history. Because if we are to believe our sages and Chazal's presentation of their perspective and philosophy on all of history, the entire project of the creation of the physical realm hinges on this journey. That Am Yisrael are making their way from their chains and shackles of their slavery, and they're on their way to receive the Torah on behalf of humankind, so that Am Yisrael can then learn how to become an Or LaGoyim, to reconstitute the human family, to become a priesthood nation. We were supposed to have, and we will, Be'ezras Hashem, have, and we have had. But we ain't seen nothing yet, nothing started. We're going to be the priesthood sect of humanity. And we have the answers that the world is looking for. We have to discover them for ourselves first, insularly, particularly, and then to project it universally. The whole history hinges on this journey from Mitzrayim to Har Sinai. And the pasuk tells us Amalek appears as Am Yisrael are traveling from point A to point B, and Asher Karcha Baderech, and they happen upon Klal Yisrael along the way. That's what the word means in a simple translation. Asher Karcha Baderech, they happened upon you along the way. Chazal comment that word Karcha, which we translated as they just sort of happened upon Klal Yisrael, actually has a root which alludes to a completely different word, which is the word kar. And kar means cold. Kar means frozen. Karach is ice, freezing, frozen. And the Sfarim explain, based on Rashi and Chazal, that Asher Karcha Baderech means that Am Yisrael had left Egypt with a fire of vision and idealism. And Am Yisrael really believed that they could change the world. That their journey would sit at the core of the whole unfolding of human history. And they really believed that we could really turn this whole world into paradise. They really believed it. Asher Karcha Baderech means that Amalek approaches to cool down that flame. To take that mayim chayim, that flowing water, that living spring, and to lower the temperature steadily until it freezes. And that's it. And frozen water doesn't flow anywhere. It stops where it is, and it's stuck in ice. So I heard from one of my Rebbeim, Rav Tzvi Cheshen, Shlita in Eretz Yisrael. He said this is the deeper meaning of what Chazal mean when they describe Amalek as a Leitz. They see this word in the pasuk Leitz as a reference to Amalek, this jester, this jokester, this comedian. Because he says, what's a joke? A person tells you a good joke. What's the whole thing of a joke? A joke starts a certain way. A person makes a statement. And then you don't really know where they're going with it. But according to the regular mode of our logic, the way that our brain works, you'd assume that it's heading in a certain direction. And then all of a sudden it gets diverted. Like all of a sudden the whole thing changes and they say something so outlandish and so not in the way. I'll give you an example. Prepared a couple of jokes. I won't say all of them. I'll just give an example. Also, American and British humor is not exactly the same, so I'm going on a limb over here. Somebody said, my wife came to me and told me recently that I've really grown a lot as a person. Okay, so that statement is going in a certain direction. He says, well, what she actually told me is that I've been gaining a lot of weight recently. She's growing a lot as a person. So that all of a sudden that takes a diversion. Another one, the same guy. Okay, there's a little bit more American, but forgive me. He says, I recently started a business to teach short people math. Okay? He says, do you know what the business is called? Making the little things count. Short people? Okay. Anyway, so what's the whole point? The point is that this is how jokes start. They go in a certain direction, and then out of left field comes this thing you never would have expected, making the little things count. And all of a sudden, you'll never be able to hear anyone say that again without thinking of midgets learning math, because that's it. And that's what it is. I'm sorry, I ruined that expression for you forever. Right? Making the little things count. This is a joke. A joke diverts. In a sense, Amalek is telling a joke. Because the regular narrative of Jewish history is that Am Yisrael get out of Egypt and there's a very clear trajectory from point A to point B and they're on their way to Har Sinai, and Amalek attempts to deflect us. He tells a joke. Now this joke is not really a funny joke, it's a very sardonic, almost a very dark joke, a very depressive joke, where he takes what was going to be an optimistic storyline, something that's going in a direction of light and of joy and of healing and of elevation, and he just shoves it, or attempts to shove it, off the path. We win that battle with Amalek. Vayachal Yeshua's Amalek l'fi charev. The pasuk says Yehoshua weakens Amalek with the sword, and we know Moshe Rabbeinu is standing with his hands up on the mountain. Right, this visual is a familiar one, but we didn't win the war. and that war continues still. And here I want to learn a little bit from Rabbi Nachman in a number of places. I'm not going to read inside, I didn't make source sheets. But Rabbi Nachman wants to take us back to the ancestor of Amalek, the grandfather really of the person who was called Amalek, which is Esav. Esav and Amalek are linked together in the same way that Haman is linked to Amalek. It's all one energy. And you can say even deeper, if you want to say even deeper, that really the first time this energy appears in the Torah is in the form of the Nachash, in the form of the snake. Where the Zohar tells us that that snake, that serpent in the Garden of Eden, is the first manifestation of the energy of Amalek, and you can track the same energy that we're describing based on the pasuk Asher Karcha B'derech, all applies to the Nachash in Gan Eden. Adam and Chava are created. They believe in Hashem. Hashem tells them not to eat from the tree. They're not interested in eating from the tree. God told them, and here comes Amalek, and he changes the whole dynamic. This is the Nachash. This is Amalek. This is Esav. And I want to preface Rabbi Nachman's comments about Esav with another teaching, which is, if you're interested in looking it up, is the 70th teaching in the Sefer Likutei Moharan, which I give a daily shiur in. And the Rebbe says something, I think, remarkable and frightening, but also optimistic as well. The Rebbe says, I want you to know that there are two forces in creation. He says one force is a force that's called Koach HaMoshech. Koach HaMoshech means, let's say, we can translate it loosely, gravity. Right? It literally means the force that pulls. Right? But it means gravity. Koach HaMoshech is gravity. And the Rebbe says there's another force that's called Koach HaMachriach. A force that pushes away, that compels, as opposed to draws close. And the Rebbe gives an example. He says the whole entire earth constantly exercises a Koach HaMoshech on everything in this room. If that were to cease, it was interesting, I looked it up a long time ago, when I was first giving shiurim on this Torah, actually years ago in Chicago, where we first lived after we got married. The first thing that would happen, interestingly enough, if gravity just shut off, is our eardrums would burst. I just have that imprinted on my memory for some reason. And then everything would just implode, like there would be absolute chaos. Everything would explode apart. So gravity is an exercising force that's being exercised on everything, keeping everything coherently together all the time. The Rebbe says that if you take some kind of ball or some kind of object and you throw it up into the atmosphere, you've invested that object or item with the Koach HaMachriach, right, with the compelling force, and all the while, to the extent of the energy and the force that you put, as a little physics class, Rabbi Nachman says, to the extent that you put energy into this thing, it has momentum, and it'll move, and I'm sure there's some formula for this, I don't know it, it'll move in accordance with how much energy you've invested into it, and it'll go that high and that far, and then when that runs out, it's going to come back to the earth. Because the Koach HaMachriach still operates within the broader influence of the Koach HaMoshech. It's just, for the moment, it enables this thing to fly. Says Rabbi Nachman, this is all good and well when you talk about gravity and taking a baseball or a football or a basketball or some kind of and throw it, because then you can see it clearly. Okay, here's gravity, and that's the Koach HaMoshech, and you can sort of see there's a trajectory. It goes up, but it comes down, and that's the whole thing. The Rebbe says, I want you to know that there are some aspects of Koach HaMoshech in the world that are so incredibly powerful that they can actually make us think that they are the real Koach HaMoshech. They carry so much force with them that it no longer seems as if this is an exception to the rule. This becomes the rule. And today we have rockets, right, that can literally go out of the field of Earth's gravity and maybe come into the gravitational field of other objects, in space. And today we have relativity and many different theories of how gravity works and so on. But in a more limited realm, The Rebbe says, what happens when we begin to mistake the koach hamachriach, the force that's pushing us away from our true selves, and we confuse it for the koach hamoshech, where I say, that looks more powerful than that. Maybe that's the koach hamoshech. Maybe it's actually exercising a stronger energy of gravitational force than like actual gravity in and of itself.
Can you give an example?
So here I'm just talking in abstractions. Now let's bring it to what we're speaking about. So the Rebbe says all this is a metaphor. And the metaphor is reality, spirituality, which is the real essence of all of creation, and the opposite, which is not real and temporary. You would assume that because reality, which is kedusha, right, which is holiness, which is things that last and things that have meaning, those things that are our base level identity from the standpoint of us really being souls, that those things would attract us, would pull us, would draw us with tremendous force and consistency. From time to time, we can fall under the realm of the koach hamachriach, of those things that push us away from our true essence. And sometimes we're able to recognize, okay, there's a part of me that wants that, but that's not the real me. Meaning, the real me is rooted in the infinite gravitational pull of holiness and of the divine. And we all grapple with like life as a tension between body and soul. So here we're using a little bit more sophisticated terminology between the soul, the koach hamoshech that's pulling me toward my essence, and the koach hamachriach, things that are pushing me away, and that's life. We all deal with a duality all the time of these oppositional forces. We'll take questions in a minute. Just have to develop the idea a little bit. But when a person falls so deeply into an experience of the koach hamachriach, sometimes they can be mistaken to think, well, actually, this is my true self. Like, their whole center of identity shifts. And they begin to think, maybe when I'm in shul, or davening, or learning, or at a shiur, maybe that's like the exception. Right? Maybe that's the koach hamachriach. That's just sort of pushing me away out of my natural state. And the true koach hamoshech is Netflix. I was on the couch with a lot of Hamantashen, let's say, around Purim time, or something else. I mean, that's where I feel at home. So there's this moment where our whole identity shifts, where that which a healthy person is able to understand, that's not really what I want. But there's a part of me that wants that, but that's the exception that draws me. But the real me is rooted in reality. There's a moment where the whole entire narrative shifts. And Amalek is so successful in diverting us along the journey that we knew, this is what it is to be a Jew, is to go from here to Sinai. That's where we're headed. And Amalek is so capable and so powerful in diverting us off course that we start to believe in that new course. And instead of it being a joke, it's just a new narrative. And we buy into it. And we begin to believe, maybe I'm not a soul, and maybe I'm actually a body. Maybe the spiritual stuff is like awkward and like strange and inauthentic. That's not really me. And I'm most alive and I'm most myself when I'm connected to the physical and not to the spiritual.
And it's the joke doing the shift.
It's the joke that is so convincing that it becomes the new narrative.
That's why it's not the Leitz is opposed to the person, and it's not like an epikos that is opposed to a truth seeker. It's a Leitz.
It's a Leitz. A Leitz is very different, because an epikuros is still in the seeking journey, right? And we can channel that. The Leitz is something else. The Leitz wants to literally shift the entire dynamic. I just want to, 1 second, we'll take a question and 2 questions. I just want to, because abstract ideas are just trying to enter into a whole and set up a concept. Let's bring it a little bit more specific. We're beginning with the premise that which we would assume is infinitely powerful is the draw toward holiness, which is the true reality. The draw toward our essence, toward the essence of all things, toward Hashem's presence in the world, toward things that engage our desperate thirst for real meaning, which means that our lives should really matter, like a capital M, where every moment we're making use of our time here to do real things, and not fleeting things, but to really be connected to MS. MS is lasting. That's what we would assume. Amalek's whole job is to shift that narrative and to cool us off along that journey, to tell us it's all a scam. Like you've fallen for an optical illusion. There's nothing. There is no what's Sinai. There's no you're gonna receive the Torah. You're gonna change the world. You dream about Mashiach coming. Like look around. Like Amalek gives us all the data. Amalek is like cool rationalism. It's cold, and it just gives us all the facts. And he says, "What are you gonna do? Look, it's black on white." And to a person who's stuck in that, what's effectively a koach hamachriach, right? That's really pushing us away from the true koach hamoshech. A person who buys into that enough, their whole sense of perspective shifts, where now they swap the koach hamoshech for the koach hamachriach, and the koach hamachriach for the koach hamoshech. And now, instead of it being, I'm a neshama that from time to time gets stuck in this worldliness, but I recognize that that's not really me, and it's not really what I want, and I naturally, meaning my default setting is to fall back into the gravitational pull of Hashem's embrace, right? And instead it becomes the opposite. Really who I am is a physical entity that's involved in all the physical experiences of this world, and that's really the essential me. And strangely, from time to time, I'm compelled into an experience of spirituality. And then my base level, or my default, is to go back there. And that's the Leitz and the Leitzanut, the mockery of Amalek, who comes to tell this joke, which is heading in one direction and deflects us so convincingly that our entire perspective and our self-identity, and thereby on the entire world, shifts fundamentally. That's a very dangerous moment. Is that a little bit clear? Yeah, we have a question. We'll take a question first. Yeah. No, go ahead.
I'm trying to suggest that the word, I think the tzel, sorry, I've swapped let's with tzel.
Good.
Which I think it has a lot to do with it.
Absolutely.
Because it's following us.
Yes.
It's with us wherever we go. And I think there's a connection between that tzel and the coldness, the petty, because what we say in Hebrew is peti ma'amin lechol davar. That we look for meaning. And that cell kind of, it's something that we see, it's tangible, we can see. We can't get away with it, from it. I think there is a problem. It's like a vicious circle.
Amazing. I totally agree. I think that's a really incredible insight. Leitz and Sel. And that's our sort of shadow self. Amalek wants to push us into the shadow and not to live in our
it is with us the whole time.
Our true self. That's the battle. That's the struggle. That's the struggle. Excellent. Amazing. Yeah, question?
Yeah. When people talk about the body and the bodily urges, people generally talk about it as earth, as heaviness, as pulling us down. So if that's not the actual reality, then why do we refer to it as that? No,
I would say that's exactly the point. Because taken to an extreme, the body wants to convince you that it is the gravitational pull.
So it's
it is exactly. That's what we're saying. The koach hamoshe, the koach hamachriach, which isn't gravity, is so powerful that all of a sudden we start to think that that's gravity, and our whole perception changes. But let's let it unfold a little bit more.
Hamachriach is always negative. As in, it's always here to trick us, to pull us away from the MS?
In this context. Now, if you want to know in a very, very deep way, every experience of a koach hamachriach is actually really the koach hamoshech, just working in a different way. Because there is no experience outside of spirituality. Even this experience of falling into Amalek, and there's healing there too. So from the standpoint of Amunah, there is no koach hamachriach fundamentally. And that's what it means. The Satan is, I gave a shiur just Sunday, I said a radical thing. I said, the Yetzer Hara never, ever, ever listen to his Yetzer Hara. Because the Yetzer Hara does exactly what God wants it to do. I said the Yetzer Hara never did an Avera. Because the Yetzer Hara is literally doing exactly what God... I don't think the Yetzer Hara has an Avera, has a Yetzer Hara. He just has a Yetzer Tov, apparently. Because Rabbi Nachman says the Yetzer Hara is a holy malach. He's a holy angel. So from that standpoint, it's all God. It's just, but it's useful from our perspective to be able to see what's bitter, what's sweet, what's real, what's false, and we're going to develop that theme in a moment. If we could hold questions, just because otherwise, I'd love to. We're running out of time, but we'll take one more question for now, though. Yeah.
It's kind of on that theme.
If you don't mind passing the water, thank you so much.
But if it's distracting, then you can ask.
No, not at all. Not at all.
It's just how do we relate the Amalek to Hashem? Is it something? Is it part of Hashem? Is it created by, obviously, created by Hashem? Or is it part of the Tzimtzum? Or is it how do we relate?
Yeah. Excellent question. There's nothing. Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
maybe I'll get the rest of the recording and you'll hear something. We haven't started yet, but thank you for coming. So Amalek is generally, there's nothing that isn't Hashem, from the standpoint of, the ultimate Ein Od Milvado. So this is all an experience of godliness, because there's nothing outside of Hashem. Every experience in existence is fundamentally that. Generally, to understand the Yetzer Hara and to understand the Satan and the Malach HaMaves, it's all one fellow. It's all the same cluster of energies. Is generally seen as an illusory force that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created in a completely mysterious way that has no fundamental existence in and of itself, other than its capacity to conceal the true existence. It's like the existence of dark, which is understood as really, really only being the absence of light. So does darkness exist? Sure, it's an experience we can describe, right? We can experience darkness, but it fundamentally is just the absence of something else. And that's basically the way that I come to understand Amalek, but at the same time, like we said, it's doing exactly what God wants it to do. And that's part of this experience of this world, is to be able to choose between Tov and Ra, to be able to choose between Chaim, between life, and Maves, and death. And now we're giving two new phrases, which I think are very useful, which is to be able to choose between Koach HaMoshech and Koach HaMachriach. And what we're suggesting is that what can happen, Chas v'Shalom, is where a person begins to swap one for the other. And they, in their own self-identity, begin to identify with the Koach HaMachriach as opposed to the Koach HaMoshech, and that's a terrible identity crisis. And this is hinted to in the pasuk that tells us, woe is to those who call what's good evil, and what's evil good. Because all the while that a person still has that kind of moral clarity, they can be doing evil, but at least they know. Over here we're talking about such a of an hapachu, where everything is flipped. Okay. Talking about Esav all the way on the other side of Likutei Moharan in the 8th lesson in the Sefer, Rabbi Nachman says that Esav is described in the pasuk as an ish sa'ir. Ish sa'ir means he was a hairy person, right? He was born red. He had a lot of red hair, and that's what it means, ish sa'ir. Sa'ir later on became like Har Sa'ir, right? Har Sa'ir becomes Esav's mountain, right? He's an ish sa'ir. So the Rebbe uses a technique that you find in the Svarim in the realm of Torah that's called Drush, where there are certain rules where things are a little bit looser than in the realm of Pshat, where if a sound is produced by one Hebrew letter and that same sound is produced by another Hebrew letter, you can sort of they're interchangeable. So the Rebbe swaps out the sin of the word sa'ir for a samach, and he says this is ruach sa'ara. He says Esav is a person who's connected to a ruach sa'ara, which means a storm wind. Rabbi Nachman says it's a hurricane. Esav is a hurricane. And the Rebbe says Yaakov, right? Yaakov Avinu was the contrast of Esav. is regular breeze. Now says the Rebbe, if a person experiences a hurricane and they don't know anything about a hurricane, they never knew, they don't know that there's such a thing called a hurricane, all of a sudden out of the blue, the wind picks up 100 miles an hour and everything's blowing all over the place, and he'd never experienced such might and such power in his world. Rabbi Nachman says, he doesn't say this explicitly, but I'm just fleshing it out, he would think that it's going to last forever and ever and ever. Because the power, the might of that experience. Rabbi Nachman over here, he says, he uses this lashon, v'alkein haruach shalahem, just read one sentence. He says the spirit of Esav, gadol v'takif, is incredibly powerful. But here's the key words. Lefisha. Temporarily. That's the key. It is much more powerful than a regular wind, but it's temporary. Kamay ruach sa'are says, just like a hurricane, shehu gadol b'sha'ato. It is incredibly mighty, but it's only l'sha'ato. It's only for its particular time. And it's not like a breeze, which is all the time. And here we have to focus on the essential distinction between Yaakov Avinu and Esav. Yaakov Avinu is connected to the trait of emes, to the trait of truth. The pasuk describes Yaakov Avinu as an ishtam. Ishtam is the letters yesh, emet. Yaakov Avinu is ishtam. Right? It says, the pasuk tells us, v'nasan lanu toras emes. Hashem gave us a Torah of truth. And the Torah is always connected to Yaakov Avinu, but there's a much more exact source, which says Titeid Emes LiYaakov. Right? Truth is given to Yaakov Avinu. What's the nature of truth? How do you define truth? It's a terrible thing to try to do with a dictionary, because it leads you in a circle. Truth is that which can be proven in accordance with fact. What's a fact? That which is true, whatever. Like, it goes in source, it takes you to a few stops along, and it just brings you right back. What is truth? How do you define truth? The way the Sfarim define truth is with another word that isn't just part of this loop, this meaningless loop, but it's a very important word. The word is eternality. Something that is eternal is true. Something that is true is really true. Not today and not this week, but always. It is immutable. And there are many, many, many psukim that bear this out. The pasuk says, Svas emes, words of truth, tikon la'ad, last forever. The Gemara tells us in Shabbos, kushta koi. One of the differences between the word sheker and the word emes is that emes is created with block letters. Each of them either has two legs, or in the case of the mem, right, it has like a flat line on the bottom. It's very stable. Sheker has one long line that comes down from the kuf, and it's a sheker ein laraglaim. Sheker can't stand, which may be why the Nachash, who's the first manifestation of Amalek, as the curse, loses his legs, right? Because sheker can't stand. Kushta koi, truth stands. Shikr loy koi. Sheker can't last. V'nasan lanu tairas emes, like we said, God put a true Torah inside of us. V'chaye olam nata v'sichin, lasts forever. Sheker in the alphabet are three letters that are right next to each other. Shin, kuf, resh, right? Just right in the same spot in the aleph base. Emes is the first letter of the aleph base is the aleph. The mem is the middle of the aleph base, and the tav is the end. It's the whole thing. Emes is here forever. The pasuk tells us, Reishis Goyim Amalek. Amalek is foremost among the nations of the world. Do you know what the Rashi Tevos, what the acronym, the opening letters of Reishis Goyim Amalek spells? Reishis Goyim Amalek? Rega. It's just for the moment. His whole thing is just for the moment, just temporary. Very powerful. It's a hurricane. And you can think that it's the true koach hamoshech. It becomes gravity. It is incredibly convincing. But it comes with a storm, and it leaves with a whisper. It's gone. A hurricane. It comes and it goes. The Gemara tells us in Tainus, it's one of my favorite Gemaras, and it's something that I really aspire to. The Gemara says, La'olam yeh adam rach karkana. Let a person always be, rach means malleable, soft, like a reed. Ba'al yeh kasha ke'eres. And not mighty like or kasha, like rigid, like a cedar tree. Why? Because the Gemara says a reed, winds will blow in the world, and it's so delicate, but specifically because of its delicate nature and its malleability, it will blow this way, it'll blow that way, it'll blow this way, that way, but it stays rooted in the ground. A cedar tree looks very mighty, but the moment that a strong wind hits it in a certain way, it snaps in half. The depth of our engagement with this illusory koyach hamachriach of olam hazeh, with all the sparkles and the lights and everything that looks so mighty. And you see today, you just look around what's going on, if you read the news in the financial markets, the way that the whole world is connected, we don't even know anything anymore. There's a very wonderful and scary book called The Black Swan, a very famous book, which describes like black swan events and the way that, there are things that basically shake up. So everybody says swans are white, and then all of a sudden you see a black swan, and you don't know quite how to account for it. And like, for example, September 11th is a black swan event, changes everything. Nobody could have accounted for that. I don't care how many degrees you have hanging on your wall. There are things in this world that are fundamentally unpredictable. And when we go through experiences in the world like we're going through now with the global order that we mentioned earlier is shifting and breaking down, and there's so much uncertainty, you recognize how fragile this world is. You recognize that all these stockbrokers with huge portfolios, in a day it can be gone. In a day, things that look mighty, things that look absolutely certain. People who have good investments, with a guy called Bernie Madoff, good investments for decades and decades and decades. Strong cedar trees can blow over. But if a person roots themselves in the koach hamoshech, it might not look as potent and intense and powerful, but the way that we can identify what it is by the degree to which it makes it like in the end. It's consistent. It's something that's true today. It's something that was true yesterday. It was something that was true 1,000 years ago, and it's something that will always be true. I was watching an interview a bunch of months ago between Sam Altman, who's the CEO of ChatGPT, and a couple of people were interviewing him. And I'm very interested in this because I think that AI, you have to be blind not to see what Hashem's doing in the world. As brand new things are happening, and it's just in its infancy. And Jews have to be, we have to have our eyes open. What's Hashem doing in His world? We have to be conscious of this. So I sometimes watching these, I want to stay on top of it, what's going on in this space. I had a fascinating conversation. It was a Q&A, and at the end, there was a penultimate question that was asked, and I'm using that word incorrectly, as I've recently learned. I used to think penultimate is like the ultimate of ultimate, and apparently it's not that. Apparently it like literally doesn't mean what it sounds like. Penultimate is like, it's like not quite ultimate. It's like the second to ultimate. Okay, so the ultimate question was asked, but I feel like there needs to be a better word, like super ultimate, whatever. We have to think of a word. I used to think it was penultimate. Let me down. But a very, very important question was asked. And the question that was asked was, if, in accordance with the projections of the people that are creating this technology, in 15 years from now, we won't need to do anything anymore from the standpoint of household tasks, physical labor, like all. I can't guarantee anything. I can't guarantee anything, but this is what they're claiming. So let's just go with them for a second, and let's trust that they have probably the next couple of generations already developed, and they're just not releasing them. I don't know what it is and what it isn't, but we'll wait and see. It's going to be an interesting couple of years. So the question was asked, what will people do? There's a question. which I think is so incredible. Like, we're finally at a point in our, we're like, we've gotten all the stuff out of the way, and like, okay, what does it actually mean to be human, though? You know, which I think is remarkable. That these are conversations that are now being had in the media. What will people do? Because, like, what is life if it isn't a 9 to 5, and if it isn't, you know, household chores, and if it isn't making dinner, and if like, what is it? What do you do? Listen to what he said. Ready? Listen to this. Oh, that's probably true. He said, hopefully, he said this. He said the things that human beings were doing 5,000 years ago and are still doing now, they will continue to do forever. He said there will always be families. There will always be parents and children. There will always be relationships. There will always be, awe at nature. He said the same thing that humans were doing then, and like that's been a constant, will be a constant. And I found that to be very both comforting and remarkable. Remarkable. MS is forever. MS is lasting. MS is the capacity to connect ourselves to the Koach HaMoshech. This, I know I spoke very little about Purim. This is what Purim is. Purim is that final moment in Jewish history when Amalek, who's become so convinced of his narrative that started out as a joke, meaning a deflection from the Koach HaMoshech, that was the Koach HaMachriach, but that became the Koach HaMoshech, jokes on you when we deflect that back towards Sinai. When that narrative of Amalek's literally buying into this theory that there is nothing more than a reductionist physical experience of this worldliness, and there's nothing spiritual, and there's nothing, and Am Yisrael become the Leitz HaKadosh, we become the holy comedian that actually, plot twist, and the whole thing switches back. Where it turns out that which you became convinced was the Koach HaMoshech was really the Koach HaMachriach all along. And this is the pasuk that tells us, Az yimale schok pinu. La'asid lavo, in that time to come, our mouths will fill with laughter. Because we'll have had the last laugh. Batischak liyom acharon. On that last day, Am Yisrael have that last laugh. Vatischak liyom ha'acharon. This is the moment of the recognition that v'nahapachu. Amalek was the first one to do the v'nahapach, because what started out was a clear narrative of the gravity of the infinite force of godliness. That was how history started out, and Adam and Chava saw that and lived that, and they were with it. It comes the Nachash, and he made the first v'nahapachu. And he turned this world into what's described in the Gemara Bava Basra as an olam hafuch. Olam hafuch re'iti. He turned this whole world upside down. We've become so used to this upside down world that we think it's right side up. And is going to come a moment, V'ezras Hashem, let it be this Purim, where v'nahapachu, where everything turns right side up again. And then vatischak liyom acharon. And then azim ale schok pinu, with the realization that shu asam, our salvation, hayisa lanetzach. Like the pasuk says, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. The eternality of the Jewish nation is rooted in our truth, in our true Koach HaMoshech, and that's lo yishaker. There's no falsehood there. There's no Reishis Goyim Amalek. It's the Ruach Sa'ara of Esav. It's Takif Lefisha. It's a hurricane. It's a big mighty cedar tree. But it snaps. And everything reverts to the way that it was. And this is a moment of realization that we could each have this Purim in our own individual lives to really think like, who am I? Where do I feel at home? What do I consider in my life to be the Koach HaMoshech? And what do I consider to be the Koach HaMachriach? What's my default? Where do I feel most at home? And what's the exception? And how can I a little bit do the work to identify more deeply as a neshama and thereby identify more deeply with my spiritual experiences as my home and come to recognize those experiences that each of us have that push us away as really being koach hamachriach and recognizing it as such and calling it out and saying, that's not really what I want, that's not really what I'm here for, that's not going to connect me to eternity, and more than that, one day it's going to be exposed for what it is. And this ball that I threw up, what goes up must come down. Hashem should help us that we should overcome this spirit of Amalek inside of us personally. We should overcome it collectively, and we should be privileged enough to stand on the shores of the finish line of history after the ship makes it to its destination and shake with that eternal laughter of Atischak liyam achron, and to say to Amalek, joke's on you, and turn the world the right side up again. Ezras Hashem. Thank you so much for listening.